Okay, welcome to part 7. Before I start with how the deal with Frito went, I wanted to say one thing about the Sergeant Hightower thing. Now, before I start that even, I don't script anything. I just sit down and I start telling the story. I'd probably be better off if I would script some things, you know, write it down or something, because it always seems like when I do a video that I think, God, I wish I would have said this or told them about this. But real quickly, there's something I really do want to tell you about Sergeant Hightower. When Sergeant Hightower started his nonsense with me about how that just didn't seem like, you know, Officer Garland to him, blah, 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 I said to Hightower, I said, Sergeant Hightower, if you would like, I said, why don't you sit on my front porch for about an hour and watch the traffic come and go from that house, and then you may have a different attitude. Because understand, at that time, Super Trooper Charles Garland was living at that house, and actually half that house was in his name. So the fact that he was living there, I mean, he wasn't there at that particular moment. I think he was actually at work. But you could see the traffic coming and going from it. But Sergeant Hightower was not even remotely interested in that. He just wanted to defend him. But then he scurried on his way. All right. Screw Hightower. I'm done with him. Frito. I decided I'm going to work something out with Frito. He tells me to stop by his house later that evening and you know, we'll go over it. So I go down to his house. I guess about 7:30 at night, and Frito, his wife, and his son, well, they called him. His son was called Little Daniel. Not really Little Frito. Some people called him Little Frito, but most people called him Little Daniel. The three of them were there. The daughter was not there, and or Charles Garland. They welcomed me in, were as nice as pie, you know, asked me if I wanted something to drink, and then asked me what I had in mind. I said, look, I said, I'll make you a deal. I said, you can keep your fence right where it's at. I said, but you're going to have to lease that property of mine that you have fenced in. And I said, I'll tell you what, I will lease you that property for $1 a month, 12 bucks a year, which was the lowest amount, and I knew this because I talked to my attorney about it, the lowest amount that you could do in Kentucky and make it legal. Oh, and he thought that was the greatest idea in the world. In fact, Little Daniel stood up and said, let me go get you 12 bucks, we'll pay you for the year in advance. And I said, oh, hold on. I said, I want to do this legal. I said, I'd like to get the property officially surveyed, and so we know what's mine that you're leasing, and I'd like to have it drawn up into a contract, a lease agreement. And he said, well, that'd be fine, you know, and I'm like, well, great. I'll have a surveyor here tomorrow. And he said, well, just, you know, have your attorney do it up and then, you know, get it to me and I'll be happy to sign it. And as nice as he was, I thought to myself, well, shit, maybe things will start happening. You know, maybe that's really all it took, appease him on the fence thing. I know by then he had heard that I was going to do what I could not to disrupt their pot fields, their Becky gardens. So I thought, well, hell, you know, maybe I should have did this a couple weeks ago. So I went home. I felt pretty good about the situation, actually. I'm like, well, hell, I can get this project going. You know, it's a double-edged sword. Yes, I was bending to the will of a drug dealer, and you know, that's really not within my character. But you know, there was so much money on the line. I mean, it really was a mess. So yeah, maybe the capitalist in me, the greedy bastard in me, was willing to compromise my moral fiber, but I had to do what I had to do. So the next day I did have a surveyor come out, and he surveyed the property, and strangely enough, he said to me at the time, the surveyor did, he said, I think your line goes through the middle of their house. I'm like, God help me. He goes, but I don't know yet. And then afterwards he said, no, it's off the corner of their house by about 4 foot. But you know, where the property line actually runs, the corner of their garage, you wouldn't be able to get a car in and out of their garage if I was to line a fence up my property line. So Which I thought, well, that's great anyway, because then he's obviously going to sign this lease. He's not going to want to deal with that. So my surveyor drives in stakes. I take the map that he makes. Actually, he didn't give me a map that day. I told him, I said, send a map to my attorney in Pineville. I said, so he's going to draw up a lease for me. And I think he did get that out later that day to my attorney. The following day, my attorney had called me and said, hey, I have this lease all drawn up for you. It's got a little miniaturized copy of the survey in it, the whole 9 yards. He goes, but we've got one problem. And I said, what's that? He said, the house is not in Daniel Lambert's name. Frito. I'm like, well, whose name is it in? And he said, well, it's in his daughter's name and her fiancé, Charles Garland. I said, so it's not even Frito's house? And he said, apparently it's not Frito's house. He said at one time it was Frito's house, but for the love and affection that he had for his daughter, he deeded it to her shortly after he had gotten busted in 1990 for selling drugs. So, you know, one thing I've learned about drug dealers is they don't have anything in their own names. The same thing goes for check drawers. Nobody has anything in their own names. It's always in some cousins or sisters or mothers or somebody's name except for theirs. And then that way they can't have that stuff seized. You know, and Frito had learned the hard way, you know, the one thing you do is you mortgage your house to the hilt and have it in somebody else's name. That way the government's not going to seize it for drugs. So, you know, it is what it is. So I said to my attorney, I said, well, what do we do? He said, well, I can put it in his daughter's, the lease can be in his daughter's name. It doesn't have to necessarily be in Charles Garland's name, but the lease, you can actually lease it to her, and that will prevent her from trying to make an adverse possession claim in the future. I said, well, okay, because remember, adverse possession is 15 years. So if she would have signed the lease, then that would have completely taken any argument she had that fence had already been up for 15 years. So anyway, I said, well, go ahead and put it in her name then, and I'll have her sign it. And he said, okay. So I get the lease from that guy, and I went down to Frito's and I said, hey, I said, I've got this lease. It's ready to be signed. And he said, well, come on in. Now, his daughter was there at the time when I got in there. Now, Charles Garland wasn't there, but his daughter was there, who had to actually be the one to sign the lease. I walk in the door, and I had the survey map and the lease, and I said to his daughter, I said, hey, I said, I'm going to need you to sign this. And the look on Frito's face completely changed from, hey, how you doing, come on in, to, you know, to actually kind of nasty. There's a word for what he was trying to pull on me. In the South, it's called hoodooed. Up north, it's called trick fucked, and several other things. But what he was trying to do was he was trying to hoodoo me, because he could have signed that lease all day long, but it really would not have affected the adverse possession claim that she was obviously going to try to make. So I said, look, I said, she's got to sign this lease. The house is in her name. And I pulled out the map that actually showed, and I looked at her and I said, here's where my property line is. And she blew a gasket. She's only about 5'2". She's really, really good looking girl. I mean, she's I think at that time she was probably 23 maybe, smoking hot, and she just blows up and she starts hurling F words at me. I mean, get the F out of my house, and you can stick that up your effing ass and all this stuff. And I'm just like, wow, okay. You don't have to ask me twice to leave your house, you know, so. And she says to me, you want my boyfriend to come down and talk to you? She was talking about Charles Garland. And I got a little pissy, then I'm like, what, the traffic cop? Yeah, have him come down and talk to me, you know. So then I get off the front porch, and she said to me, she goes, you have all this property, what do you want with my little bit here? I said, because it's mine. And then I go, I pay taxes on it. And she goes, well, maybe you ought to stop paying taxes. I said, it don't work that way for people like me. We have to pay our taxes. Anyway, she told me to get packing, and she, for such a pretty little girl, she could dish it out. It was something to see. So now I'm back to square one. I'm like, good Lord, what the hell? It was really becoming a pretty bad scene. So I go home and I'm like, well, hell, this whole thing's falling apart. I actually called my lawyer and I told him what had happened, and he just was, you know, well, we were both kind of like, what the hell? And then my phone rang, and it was Pinhead. And when I come back, I'm going to tell you all about that, so stay tuned for part 8.